When Jason found me, I was in the flower shop trimming a freshly arrived bunch of chamomile. He pushed open the door, dressed in a sharp black suit, enveloped in the scent of hospital disinfectant. Then, this man who single-handedly built a business empire that commanded the attention of the entire city knelt down with a thud in front of everyone in my small flower shop. The surrounding air seemed to be instantly drained. The scissors in my hand nearly fell. We had broken up 5 years ago. In those 5 years, the love story between him and his first love, Vivian, had already spread throughout the city. And I, Selina, was just an insignificant ex-girlfriend in his brilliant life, one that should have been forgotten long ago. Selina, he spoke, his voice extremely hoarse, please, save Vivian. Vivian. He called her name so intimately. I put down the scissors, walked over, and squatted in front of him. I looked at him, this man whom I had loved throughout my entire youth, now kneeling at my feet for another woman. To be honest, it was a bit ridiculous. How can I save her? I asked. Her heart disease has relapsed, and she urgently needs a blood transfusion. His eyes were full of red veins, filled with despair. She has Rh-negative blood, and no matching blood source can be found in the entire city. Only you. Oh, so that's how it is. I stood up and brushed off the grass clippings from my hands. Jason, we've already broken up. My voice was calm. I have no obligation to save your beloved, do I? He suddenly looked up at me, his eyes filled with shock and disbelief, as if my refusal was something unforgivable. Yes, who is Jason? A favored son of heaven. He has never failed to get what he wants. He thought that if he knelt, I would soften and compromise as before. Unfortunately, I am no longer that foolish girl from back then. Selina. He grabbed my pant leg with frightening strength. I'm begging you. As long as you're willing to save Vivian, I'll give you anything you want. Money? A house? Or, do you want shares in my company? I laughed. Jason, look. I pointed to my flower shop. I'm doing quite well, I don't lack money. As for your shares, I paused, they're dirty. His face instantly turned pale. I walked around him, preparing to return to the counter. But behind me, he said a sentence. A sentence that I couldn't refuse. Selina, have you forgotten about your brother Ian? My steps suddenly froze in place. Ian, my only brother. 3 years ago, he was diagnosed with acute leukemia. At that time, I had just broken up with him and had nothing. It was Jason who anonymously paid for all of Ian's medical expenses. It was also he who used all his connections to bring in the best experts from abroad. That's how Ian's life was saved. He never mentioned this to me. I found out later by chance from a doctor friend. This is what I owe him. I turned around, looking at Jason still kneeling on the ground. Fine, I said, I'll save her. The despair in his eyes was instantly replaced by ecstasy. Selina. Thank you. I knew. However, I have a condition, I interrupted him. Tell me. Not just 1, 100 would be fine. Drawing blood is okay. I looked into his eyes and said word by word, but I want you to sign an agreement. In Jason's private hospital. I sat in the blood-drawing chair, watching him sign his name on the agreement with flourish. The content of the agreement was simple. I, Selina, voluntarily donate 400 milliliters of blood to Ms. Vivian. This act is out of humanitarian aid and has no emotional or financial entanglements with Mr. Jason. Afterward, we owe each other nothing. After Jason signed, he handed the agreement to me, his expression complex. Selina, do you have to settle accounts so clearly with me? I ignored him, took the agreement, read it carefully, and then signed my name. When the needle pierced my arm, it hurt a bit. I turned my head away, not looking at the bright red blood flowing through the tube into the blood bag. Jason stood guard beside me, his eyes fixed unblinkingly on that blood bag. His gaze was as reverent as if looking at some sacred object. It seemed that what was flowing inside was not my blood, but the life of his beloved. The blood was drawn, and my face was a bit pale. A nurse came over and handed me a cup of warm brown sugar water. "Miss Selina, please rest for a while." I was just about to take it when Jason took the cup first. I thought he was going to hand it to me. Unexpectedly, he just tested the water temperature and then hurriedly carried the cup toward another ward. From beginning to end, he didn't glance at me again. It was as if I, the benefactor who had just saved his beloved's life, had become a useless object. My heart felt like it had been pricked by a needle. "All right, Selina, what are you still expecting? We owe each other nothing." "That's fine." Supporting my slightly dizzy body, I stood up, preparing to leave. Just as I reached the door, I saw Vivian's ward door open. Jason was supporting her as they came out from inside. Vivian's face already had a hint of color. She was wearing a pure white hospital gown, looking pitiably delicate, like a fragile white lotus flower. When she saw me, she was stunned for a moment, then revealed a weak and innocent smile on her face. She broke free from Jason's support and walked up to me. "Sister," she called me. This sister made my skin crawl. "Thank you for saving me," she said. "Jason told me everything. If it weren't for you, I might." As she spoke, her eyes reddened. I didn't speak, just coldly watching her performance. She seemed not to care about my indifference at all. Instead, she leaned closer. She lowered her voice to a volume only the two of us could hear and whispered in my ear, "Sister's blood is really sweet." Vivian's words, like a venomous snake flicking its tongue, instantly coiled around my heart. Looking at her pure and flawless face, for the first time I felt a bone-chilling cold. She wasn't some innocent white lotus unaware of the world. She was the top-tier green tea. She was showing off to me, flaunting Jason's love for her, flaunting how she could easily obtain a part of my body. Before I could speak, Jason had already come over. Seeing Vivian so close to me, his brows immediately furrowed. He pulled Vivian behind him, his gaze toward me filled with vigilance and reproach. "Selina, what do you think you're doing?" His tone made it seem like I was the harmful demon. I laughed in anger. "Jason, which eye of yours saw me doing anything? It was your beloved who insisted on coming over and talking nonsense to me." Vivian immediately hid in Jason's arms, tears falling on cue. "Jason, I didn't. I just wanted to thank Sister." She cried like pear blossoms in the rain. "Is Sister still blaming me? What a reversal of black and white." Jason's heart ached immediately. He held Vivian, comforting her softly, but his gaze toward me grew colder. "Selina, that's enough," he said. "Vivian just had surgery, her body is still weak and can't withstand your stimulation. We've signed the agreement. I'll transfer the money to your card. From now on, I hope you don't appear in front of us again." After saying that, he turned and walked away, holding his precious beloved. Leaving me alone, standing in the empty corridor like a clown. I clenched the agreement in my hand. "Fine. Jason, Vivian. This is what you said. I hope you don't regret it." I thought this matter was over. I took the agreement back to my flower shop and continued my peaceful life. Jason didn't break his word. Soon, a sum of money sufficient for me to live worry-free for the rest of my life appeared on my card. I transferred all that money to a charity foundation to support children with leukemia. I didn't want any further entanglements with him. But I didn't expect that a week later, he came again. Still at the same time, still in that suit. The difference was that this time, he didn't kneel. He stood at the door of my flower shop, his expression gloomy, his face looking worse than mine. "Selina," he called my name. I ignored him and continued watering my flowers. He walked in, snatched the watering can from my hand, and smashed it hard on the ground. "Selina, I'm talking to you." "Jason, is there anything left to say between us?" I looked at him coldly. His lips pursed into a straight line. After a long time, he spoke with difficulty. "Vivian, she has developed a rejection reaction. The doctor says she needs another blood transfusion." Looking at him, I suddenly felt this was the funniest joke I'd heard this year. So what? I asked. What does this have to do with me? He seemed choked by my words. He stared at me intently, his eyes filled with anger, unwillingness, and a trace of pleading that even he hadn't noticed. Selina, I know this request is excessive. But only your blood can save her. Save her one more time. He lowered his posture, his voice carrying a plea. The last time. The last time. Those 4 words again. Looking at Jason, this man who was once arrogant in front of me, now repeatedly humbling himself for his first love. If I were the old Selina, I might have softened. Unfortunately, I'm not anymore. Jason, we signed an agreement, I reminded him. It's in black and white, we owe each other nothing. The agreement can be voided, he said urgently. I can give you double the money. No, 10 times. Do you think I lack your money? I countered. He seemed choked again. Yes, I, Selina, although running a small flower shop, am not so desperate as to sell my blood repeatedly for money. He looked at me, the anxiety in his eyes about to overflow. I knew Vivian's condition must be bad, otherwise, he wouldn't tear off his arrogant mask so quickly. To be honest, I felt a trace of vengeful pleasure in my heart. Jason, leave, I said. I won't save her again. Selina. He stepped forward, grabbing my arm with strength that seemed intent on crushing my bones. His eyes were filled with red veins, like a beast driven to desperation. Do you have to be so heartless? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. Are you just going to watch her die? Whether she dies or not, what does it have to do with me? I tried hard to shake off his hand. Back then, when my brother was lying on the hospital bed, on the brink of life and death, where were you? If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have broken up at all. If it weren't for your precious Vivian, would my brother have suffered so much? The grievances and anger accumulated over the years erupted completely at this moment. That's right, back then, Jason and I had reached the point of discussing marriage. But Vivian returned. This first love, his childhood sweetheart who grew up with him. As soon as she returned, she got a not too serious illness. Jason's world was thrown into chaos. He started accompanying her, taking care of her, 24 hours a day, never leaving her side. He forgot all about me, his official girlfriend. I argued with him, made a fuss. In the end, what I got was his sentence, Selina, can you be more sensible? Vivian has only me. At that time, Ian was just diagnosed with leukemia. I was desperate and went to find him. But his phone was always unreachable. I went to his company, and his secretary said Jason had accompanied Miss Vivian abroad for convalescence. At that moment, I completely gave up. I had never told anyone about these things. Today, I roared them all out in front of him. After Jason heard it, he was completely stunned. The hand gripping me slowly loosened. For the first time, his face showed guilt and pain. Selina. I'm sorry, about what happened back then. Don't say it, I interrupted him. It's all in the past. Now, I just want to live my own life. Jason, I'm begging you. Let me go. After I finished speaking, I turned to leave. But behind me, he said in a voice nearly desperate, Selina, this time, as long as you're willing to save her, I'll give you my life. In the end, I couldn't harden my heart. Not because he still loved me, nor because of his life. It was because of Ian. Jason said that if I didn't agree, he would stop all of Ian's subsequent rehabilitation treatments. Although Ian's illness was cured, the follow-up rehabilitation still required a large sum of money. I couldn't gamble my brother's future on a moment of pride. Jason, you're really something. You always find my softest spot. Once again, I lay on that cold blood-drawing chair. Still the same nurse, still the same needle. Everything was like a repeat of yesterday. This time, Jason didn't guard the blood bag anymore. He stood beside me, looking at me, his eyes filled with endless fatigue and apology. Selina, thank you. I closed my eyes, not wanting to look at him. After the blood was drawn, my head was even dizzier. The nurse supported me, wanting to take me to the restroom. But Jason stopped her. Let her go to the ward next to Vivian's, he said. The environment there is better, and it's more convenient for care. I originally wanted to refuse. But my body's weakness left me without even the strength to speak. Just like that, I was arranged into a luxurious VIP ward. The facilities inside were better than a 5-star hotel. I lay on the bed and fell into a drowsy sleep. When I woke up again, it was already dark. In the room, only a dim yellow wall lamp was on. I moved a bit and felt something wrong with my arm. I looked down, and my pupils suddenly contracted. On my arm, there was still an 4-tube connected. And the other end of that tube was not connected to a medicine bottle, but to a working hemodialysis machine. My blood was being slowly drawn out through that tube, filtered by the machine, and then slowly transfused back. And on the other side of the machine, there was another tube leading to the wall next door. I went crazy, trying to pull out that tube. But my hands and feet were firmly fixed to the hospital bed with leather restraint straps. I couldn't move. I could only watch helplessly as my blood, was continuously drawn away by a cold machine. Someone! Help! I shouted hoarsely with all my strength. The ward door opened. Jason walked in. He was wearing a white doctor's coat, gold-rimmed glasses, looking refined and elegant. Also, refined and perverted. You're awake? He walked to my bedside, his tone calm as if discussing today's weather. Jason! You lunatic! What are you doing? I roared at him. He adjusted his glasses, looking at me with no ripple in his eyes. Even with a trace of pity. Selina, don't get agitated, he said. This is bad for your body. I just want to invite you to stay here a bit longer. Vivian's body needs long-term conditioning. The doctor says that infusing fresh, purified blood is the best way. Listening to his words, my whole body's blood seemed frozen. I finally understood what he was planning. He didn't want me to save Vivian once or twice. He wanted me to use my entire life, all my blood, to become Vivian's mobile blood bag. He built this opulent glass prison for me. Then, he prepared to devour me alive here. Jason, this is illegal. I hissed at him, my voice distorted by fear. He laughed. That smile, under the dim light, appeared particularly sinister. Illegal? He leaned down, close to my ear, his voice light like a devil's whisper. Selina, in this city, what I, Jason, say is the law. Rest assured, this hospital is fully owned by me. All the doctors and nurses here have signed the highest level of confidentiality agreements. No one will know you're here. Just rest peacefully here in convalescence. I'll give you the best nutrition, the best care, ensuring your blood is always the freshest and healthiest. Looking at him, this man I once loved. At this moment, I felt he was more terrifying than the devil. You won't succeed. I stared at him fiercely. Ian will discover I'm missing, he'll call the police. Mentioning Ian, a trace of imperceptible malice flashed in Jason's eyes. Oh, you mean Ian? He straightened up, leisurely adjusting his white coat. I've already arranged it. Tomorrow, he'll receive a letter in your handwriting. The letter says you're disappointed with everything domestic and have decided to go abroad for a new life. It also includes a one-way ticket to the Maldives. You've also left him a large sum of money, enough for him to live affluently for the rest of his life. He had thought of everything so thoroughly. Thoroughly enough to make me shiver all over. He had calculated everything. He wanted me to completely evaporate from this world. Then, naturally, squeeze out my last bit of value. Jason, I looked at him, suddenly calming down. Why do you love her so much? What exactly is so good about her? He was stunned for a moment, seemingly not expecting me to ask this. The coldness on his face slowly melted, replaced by a nearly pathological tenderness. You don't understand, he said. You won't understand. When I was little, my parents were always away. It was Vivian who would sneak over from her house window every night to talk with me. She would share half of her best candies with me. One winter, I had a high fever and was burning up nearly to death. It was she who held me with her small body, warming me, crying and begging the doctor to save me. She is my life. For her, I can do anything. He looked at me, his eyes surprisingly showing a plea. Selina, consider this my last plea. Give her back to me. Looking at him, I suddenly wanted to laugh. So, he did all this just to make up for his incomplete childhood. But why? Why use my life as a stepping stone for his love? Jason, I looked at him and said word by word. You will regret this. In the following days, I lived like a caged livestock. Every day, a dedicated nutritionist prepared my 3 meals. Those foods were exquisite and expensive, yet hard to swallow. Because I knew that every bite of food I ate, every sip of water I drank, would ultimately become nourishment for another woman. That hemodialysis machine became part of my life. It would start on schedule every day, like an untiring vampire, greedily sucking my vitality. I began to become weak and sleepy. My skin lost its former luster, becoming pale and dry. Sometimes, I would wake up in the middle of the night and, through that huge one-way glass, see the scene in the outer corridor. Jason often stood there. He just stood there quietly, looking in my direction. He couldn't see me. But I knew he was looking at me. Or rather, looking at his caged elixir of life. And behind that wall leading to the next room lived his first love, whom he had exchanged for my life. Vivian's body got better day by day. Occasionally, I could hear laughter from her and Jason next door. That laughter was like poisoned knives, torturing my heart over and over. I no longer resisted or cried. I became unusually calm. Because I knew that here, tears and anger were the most useless things. I had to live on. Only by living on could I have the chance to reclaim what they owed me, with interest. I began to cooperate with all treatments. Whatever the nutritionist told me to eat, I ate. Whatever checks the nurse asked me to do, I did. My compliance made Jason very satisfied. He even allowed Ian to have a video call with me once a month. Of course, under his strict monitoring. Every video call, Ian would ask if I was doing well abroad. I would smile and tell him I was fine, telling him not to worry. Looking at my brother's sunny face in the video, he was my only concern in this world. As long as he was fine, I had the courage to persist. But I didn't expect that my endurance would bring even crueler blows. That day, it was time for the video call with Ian again. Jason sat on the sofa next to me, like a supervisor. The video connected. But what appeared on the screen was not Ian's face, but a hospital's white ceiling. Sis. Ian's voice came from the screen, weak and full of pain. Sis, my legs seem broken. My mind exploded with a boom. I saw the video lens shake a bit. A doctor in a white coat appeared in the frame. I recognized that doctor. He was the orthopedic director of this private hospital. Miss Selina? The doctor looked at the camera and said formulaically, "Your brother was just hit by a motorcycle that ran a red light at the school gate. Both legs have comminuted fractures. I'm afraid he won't be able to stand up again." I forgot how I hung up that video call. My world, in that instant, turned completely black and white. Ian. My only brother. The boy who promised to earn money to support me and take me around the world. His legs were broken. He wouldn't be able to stand up again. I suddenly turned my head, staring fiercely at Jason sitting on the sofa. My eyes must have been red as if about to bleed. He was stunned by my gaze. Then, as if understanding something, he slowly stood up. "Selina, listen to my explanation," he said. "This was just an accident." Accident? In this world, how many coincidences are there? The day before, Ian had told me on the phone that he felt like he was being followed. The next day, he had an accident. It was you. I looked at him, my voice squeezed out through gritted teeth, cold and hoarse. Was it you? Jason neither admitted nor denied. He just looked at me silently. That silence chilled my heart more than any answer. It was him. It must be him. He was afraid Ian would discover something, so he struck first. He ruined my brother's life just so his damned first love could live peacefully using my blood. Ah. I don't know where the strength came from, but I suddenly broke free from those damned restraint straps on the bed. Like a crazed beast, I pounced on Jason. I used my nails to scratch his face. Used my teeth to bite his neck. I just wanted to kill him. I just wanted to perish together with him. Jason didn't fight back. He let me tear and scratch. Soon, his face and neck were covered in blood marks. In my mouth, I tasted a fishy sweet rust flavor. That was his blood. I finally bit him. But this was far from enough. What I wanted wasn't his blood. I wanted his life. Jason. I strangled his neck, using all my strength, roaring. I want your life. I want your life. He looked at me, at this madwoman like me. In his eyes, there was no anger, no fear. Only endless fatigue and sorrow. He grabbed my hands with astonishing strength. Selina, he looked at me and said word by word. Have you gone mad enough? Vivian is still resting next door. You've scared her. At that moment, something in my heart died completely. There is no greater sorrow than a dead heart. So this is what it feels like. I let go, my whole body as if drained of all strength, collapsing to the ground. Yes. How could I forget? Vivian. His precious beloved. Even if the sky fell, what he cared about most was whether she would be scared. What am I, Selina? What is my brother Ian? Just two stumbling blocks on his path of love that can be casually crushed. Jason adjusted his collar, which I had grabbed into a mess. He looked down at me from above, his gaze returning to its former coldness. Selina, I'm warning you. Don't try to challenge my bottom line again. For Ian, I'll hire the best doctors, use the best medicine. Ensure he lives worry-free for the rest of his life. But if you dare harm Vivian again, next time it might not be the legs that break. After saying that, he turned and walked out without looking back. He even thoughtfully closed the door for me. The room returned to a deathly silence. I lay on the cold floor, looking at the luxurious crystal chandelier on the ceiling. Tears silently flowed down. I cried for a long, long time. Until the tears were all dry. Then, I slowly got up from the ground. I walked to that huge one-way glass, looking at my reflection, that pale, haggard, and unfamiliar face. I smiled at myself in the mirror. That smile was uglier than crying. Jason, do you think this can trap me for life? Do you think destroying my brother would make me completely surrender? You're wrong. Wrong beyond measure. Don't you want my blood? Fine. I'll give it to you. I'll give you all my blood. Give it all to your precious darling. But from today on, my blood is no longer a life-saving remedy. It's a gut-piercing poison. I want you to personally consume the poison I've fed, bit by bit, all of it. I want you to pay the blood debt with blood. I pressed the bedside call bell. Soon, a nurse came in. Miss Selina, what do you need? Looking at her, I showed a docile and weak smile. Please, call Dr. Lee for me, I said. I feel a bit unwell. Dr. Lee was the director of the hematology department in this hospital. He was also the only one who, when looking at me, showed a trace of pity and sympathy in his eyes. He was my breakthrough. Dr. Lee came quickly. He performed a series of checks on me, his brows tightly furrowed. Miss Selina, your body is too weak, he sighed. Your platelet count has dropped to a dangerous critical point. If this continues, you will die. Looking at him, I asked softly, Dr. Lee, if I die, won't Vivian also be unable to live? Dr. Lee's body obviously stiffened. He looked at me, his eyes filled with struggle. I knew he was a doctor with conscience. Just forced by Jason's power, he didn't dare resist. Dr. Lee, you have family too, right? I looked at him and continued, if your daughter, your wife, was treated as a blood bag and caged, what would you do? His face instantly turned pale. Miss Selina, you. My brother is only 20. He originally had a bright future. My voice was calm, yet like a knife stabbing his heart. Now, for the rest of his life, he can only be in a wheelchair. And all this just because my blood can save another woman's life. Dr. Lee, tell me, why is this world so unfair? Dr. Lee was silent. He lowered his head, I could see his hand holding the medical record trembling. After a long time, he raised his head and looked at me. What do you want me to do? He asked. I smiled. I knew I had gambled right. I don't need you to do anything, I said. I just need you to help me with a small favor. Help me get a drug. A drug that can produce special antibodies in my blood. Dr. Lee suddenly widened his eyes, he instantly understood my intention. You're crazy. You want. I want to save myself, I interrupted him, my gaze firm as iron. Dr. Lee, I don't want to die. Nor do I want them to have it easy. The following plan proceeded unusually smoothly. With Dr. Lee's help, I began taking that special drug every day. That drug would stimulate my bone marrow to produce a hemolytic antibody specific only to Rh-negative blood. This antibody had no effect on me. But once my blood was transfused into Vivian's body, it would act like the most precise assassin, silently attacking and destroying every red blood cell in her body. She wouldn't die immediately. She would weaken and wither bit by bit. Ultimately, she would head toward death in endless pain. And Jason, the man who personally turned me into a poison source, would watch with his own eyes how he, drop by drop, sent his most beloved woman to her doom. This process was slow. Slow like a prolonged Lingchi execution. And I began to enjoy this hunt that I dominated. Every day, I would observe the activity next door through that one-way glass. Jason still went to see Vivian every day. He would read poetry to her, tell her stories. Sometimes, he would play the violin for her. That scene was truly touching. Looking at them, the smile on my lips grew colder. Laugh freely. Enjoy this last tenderness freely. Because your good days are numbered. About a month later, Vivian's body began to show some subtle changes. Her complexion was no longer as rosy as before. Instead, it showed a sickly pallor. She began to feel tired easily. Sometimes, when Jason was reading stories to her, she would fall asleep while listening. She also often had inexplicable nosebleeds. Jason started to get anxious. He invited the best experts from the entire hospital, even the country, to consult for Vivian. The conclusions were surprisingly consistent. Miss Vivian's body seems to have developed a stronger rejection reaction to the infused blood. Her hematopoietic function is rapidly declining for unknown reasons. Jason didn't believe it. He thought my blood wasn't good enough anymore. So, he had the nutritionist change me to more expensive nutritional meals. Had the doctors inject me with growth hormones that stimulate bone marrow hematopoiesis. He wanted to fatten me up a bit more so his precious beloved could eat more nutritiously. But he didn't know. The better he supplemented me, the more poisonous my blood became. Vivian's body deteriorated faster. She began losing hair in handfuls. The once pitiable long-haired beauty now had sparse hair like autumn's dry grass. She didn't even have the strength to get out of bed and walk. She could only lie in bed all day, relying on the continuous infusion of my blood to sustain life. Jason was nearly going mad. I could feel it. He spent more and more time standing in the corridor. Sometimes, he would stand there all night, like a statue of despair, a Wangfu stone. Looking at his increasingly haggard face, I had no pity in my heart. Only twisted pleasure. Jason, you've also tasted this feeling of powerlessness, haven't you? You've also experienced the pain of watching your most loved person weaken bit by bit, haven't you? This isn't enough. Far from enough. What I want is for you to be doomed eternally. That day, Dr. Lee came to do my routine check. Looking at my indicators, his eyes were full of worry. Selina, stop, he said softly. Your body is also nearing its limit. If this continues, even if he releases you, you won't live long. I smiled, my face pale as paper. Dr. Lee, do you think I still care how long I can live? From the moment Ian had the accident, I was already a dead person. Now, I'm just a walking corpse existing for revenge. Help me do one more thing, I looked at him and said. Give this to Vivian. I handed him a small USB drive. Inside was a video I had asked him to copy from the hospital surveillance. The content was simple, Jason standing in the corridor, looking at my ward all night. Accompanied by carefully selected background music and an affectionate monologue. Vivian, do you know? The one he loves has never been you. He's just seeking his lost childhood in you. And I, Selina, am the only heart demon he dares not touch in his midnight dreams. I don't know Vivian's reaction when she saw that video. I only know that afternoon, from the next ward came heartrending cries and the sound of porcelain shattering. Immediately after, Jason rushed in like a gust of wind. He charged to my bed, grabbed my neck, and lifted me from the bed. His eyes were red as if wanting to devour me. Selina, what did you do to Vivian? He roared at me. I was strangled so hard I could barely breathe. My face turned liver-colored. Looking at him, I laughed. With all my strength, I squeezed out a few words from my throat. I just, let her, see something, she should see. You're courting death. The strength in his hand increased. I felt my neck was about to be snapped. Just when I thought I was really going to die by his hand. A nurse ran in panic. Jason. Bad news. Miss Vivian, she slit her wrists. Jason's body shook violently. Like struck by lightning, he let go of me and rushed out madly. I collapsed on the bed, clutching my neck, coughing violently. Air surged back into my lungs. I survived. Next door, there was chaos again. I knew Vivian wouldn't die. Someone so afraid of death, how could she really want to die? She was just using this way to salvage Jason's heart, which had begun to waver. Sure enough. Soon, next door quieted down. Then, my ward door was pushed open again. This time, it was Vivian who came in. She sat in a wheelchair, pushed by a nurse. Her wrist was wrapped in thick gauze. Her face was even paler than mine. She told the nurse to leave, and the room was left with just the two of us again. She looked at me, no longer with the initial triumphant flaunting. Only endless fear and resentment remained. Selina, she spoke, her voice hoarse like sandpaper. What exactly do you want? I leaned against the headboard, looked at her, and laughed. What do I want? I countered. This question should be asked by me, right? Back then, who was it lying in my boyfriend's arms, saying she couldn't live? Who was it that complacently used my blood, lived in my room, and came to me saying my blood was really sweet? Vivian, tell me, how should we settle this account? She was rendered speechless by my questions. Her lips trembled, and after a long time, she said a sentence. I'll give Jason back to you, is that not enough? Please, stop. I don't want to die. I really don't want to die. She cried. Cried more genuinely than ever. Looking at her, the smile on my face slowly faded. It's too late, I said. From the moment you decided to treat me as a blood bag. From the moment you harmed my brother. This game has only one ending. That is, you die. Or I perish. Vivian was scared away. The way she looked at me was like looking at a demon crawled out from hell. From that day on, she never appeared in front of me again. The next ward also became unusually quiet. Quiet like a grave. Jason didn't come to find me anymore either. He seemed afraid too. What he feared wasn't me. What he feared was the bloody truth I had uncovered. He regarded his love with Vivian as too sacred. So much so that when this love was torn open by me in the cruelest way, revealing the selfish, dirty, even unbearable inside, he couldn't accept it. He began avoiding me. Also began avoiding Vivian. He no longer accompanied her every day. Sometimes, for 3 or 4 days, his figure couldn't be seen. And Vivian's body deteriorated rapidly at a visible speed. Without Jason's spiritual comfort, plus the daily erosion of my poisonous blood, she was like a flower rapidly withering. Her vitality was drained bit by bit. She began refusing transfusions. She was afraid too. Afraid that continuing would make her die faster. But without transfusions, she would only die more painfully. She fell into a dilemma, a dead end. A dead end I had meticulously crafted for her. I could even imagine how she shivered in despair and fear every night. I admit, I enjoyed it very much. Enjoyed this pleasure of stepping on them, who were once high above, and crushing them wantonly. That day, Dr. Lee came to deliver medicine again. His expression was more solemn than usual. Selina, he looked at me, hesitating to speak. "What's wrong?" I asked. He sighed and said, "Jason seems to be suspicious. Yesterday, he took a blood sample from Vivian. Said to send it to a secret lab abroad for testing." My heart skipped a beat. What was coming had come. But I wasn't afraid. Because everything was about to end. "I know," I said calmly. Dr. Lee looked at me, his eyes full of worry. What do you plan to do?" I smiled and took out an invitation card from under the pillow that I had prepared long ago. Handed it to him. "Dr. Lee, help me give this to Jason. Tell him, 3 days later, Vivian's recovery celebration banquet. I await his presence." Dr. Lee took the invitation, his hand shaking. You're going to show down with him?" I nodded. "Yes. This play has been going on for so long, it's time for the curtain to fall. I prepared a big gift for them. A gift sufficient to make them remember for a lifetime." 3 days later, at Jason's most luxurious Sky private club, a grand banquet was being held. Nominally, to celebrate Vivian's survival and regained health. In reality, it was a self-deceptive play Jason put on to stabilize Vivian and also his own heart on the verge of collapse. Vivian came too. She wore heavy makeup, an expensive red gown. Trying to cover her bloodless face and increasingly withered body this way. She held Jason's arm, shuttling among the guests, her face wearing a proper but stiff smile. And Jason was preoccupied. His gaze involuntarily searched the crowd for something. I knew he was looking for me. I appeared when the banquet was halfway through. I wore a black long dress. No makeup on my face. Pale like a wandering soul. My appearance instantly attracted everyone's attention. Those gazes contained surprise, curiosity, confusion. When Jason saw me, his pupils contracted sharply. Subconsciously, he protected Vivian behind him. Looking at his subconscious action, I laughed. "Even at this point, you're still protecting her. Truly deep affection." I ignored everyone. I walked straight to the small stage in the center of the banquet hall. I picked up the MC's microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, good evening." My voice spread throughout the entire hall through the speakers. Everyone quieted down, looking at me. "Let me introduce myself, I'm Selina. Mr. Jason's ex-girlfriend. And also Miss Vivian's mobile blood bag." As soon as I said this, the whole venue was in uproar. Jason's face instantly darkened. He wanted to come up and stop me. But it was already too late. I pressed the play button on the remote in my hand. On the big screen behind me, a video immediately started playing. In the video, it was me lying in that glass ward, having blood drawn day and night. It was me bound to the bed with restraints, struggling in despair. It was Ian lying on the hospital bed, legs in casts, moaning in pain. Finally, the screen froze on a hospital diagnosis report. On it, clearly written, Vivian, heart failure, bleeding from 7 orifices, died from long-term infusion of poisonous blood. Wait. No. The death time on the diagnosis was, now. At that moment, Vivian, protected behind Jason, suddenly let out a shrill scream. She suddenly spat out a mouthful of black blood. Then, her whole body went limp and fell down. Fell into Jason's arms. Her eyes were wide open, looking at him. Black blood began seeping from her nose, ears, and mouth. She died in the arms of the person she loved most. Died at her most grand and glorious banquet. The whole venue was dead silent. Then came terrified screams. I stood on the stage, looking at Jason holding Vivian, completely dumbfounded. I laughed. Laughed until tears came out. Jason, I said softly into the microphone. Do you like this big gift? Later, what happened, I can't remember clearly. I only remember the banquet scene was chaotic. Ambulance sirens, guest screams mixed together, like an absurd symphony. Jason, holding Vivian's body that had begun to stiffen, knelt in the center of the hall. Like a weathered stone statue. The police came and took many people away, including me. In the interrogation room, I told everything. From how Jason forced me to donate blood, to how he imprisoned me, to how he harmed my brother. Of course, I also admitted that with Dr. Lee's help, I poisoned Vivian. My confession, plus Dr. Lee's testimony, and those irrefutable video evidences, were enough to ruin Jason's reputation and send him to prison for life. And I, as the victim and excessive self-defense murderer, was ultimately sentenced to 10 years. 10 years. Not long, not short. Enough to turn the outside world upside down. Also enough for me to forget many things. In prison, I behaved well. Actively reformed and got a reduced sentence. 7 years later, I was released. On the day of release, the weather was good, sunny. The one who came to pick me up was Ian. He sat in the wheelchair, his face with the familiar sunny smile. Sis, he opened his arms to me. I walked over and hugged him. Tears instantly wet his shoulder. It's all over, he patted my back, comforting me like when we were kids. Yes, it's all over. Later, I heard from Dr. Lee that Jason went mad in prison. He always muttered to himself facing the wall. Sometimes calling Vivian. Sometimes calling Selina. His vast business empire had long collapsed and been divided up by the crowd. This city no longer had the name Jason. With the remaining money, I opened a small art studio for Ian. He had loved painting since childhood. Although his legs were disabled, his hands were still there. His dreams were still there. And I returned to my small flower shop. Continued trimming my flowers and plants. Life was peaceful and stable. Sometimes, in the deep night, I would dream. Dream of many years ago. That clean boy in a white shirt. He rode a bike, carrying me through the long tree-lined path. Sunlight sprinkled on us through the gaps in the leaves. Warm and cozy. He turned his head and said to me, Selina, we will be together forever. The dream ended, and dawn broke. I walked to the window and pushed it open. Outside, a round moon still hung in the sky. Looking at it, I suddenly laughed. Jason, look. The moon is round again. Unfortunately, you can no longer see it.